The craziest thing about making my first $1 million wasn't the money. It was the fact that 2 years earlier, I was standing in the Walmart break room trying to figure out whether I could afford gas to get home. No joke. Sometimes I still sit in my office, looking out over a warehouse bigger than my entire apartment used to be, and think about that night. Because if one customer hadn't yelled at me, none of this would have happened. Today, my company does over $10 million a year in sales. People see the cars, the business, the nice house, and they assume I always had some master plan. Trust me, I didn't. I was just a tired Walmart employee making a little over minimum wage, trying not to drown. Back then, I worked the evening shift. You know the type. Clock in, stock shelves, deal with angry customers, clock out. Repeat. Every day felt exactly the same. Wake up tired, go to work tired, come home tired. I was 26 years old and already felt stuck. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was watching time disappear. 1 week became a month, 1 month became a year, and nothing changed. I remember sitting in that break room one night, staring at my bank account. I had less than $80 left. Payday was still 4 days away. Rent was due, my car needed repairs, and my credit card was nearly maxed out. I felt trapped, like life was happening somewhere else and I wasn't invited. Then something happened that completely changed the way I looked at money. It started with a customer, an older guy, maybe in his 50s. He walked into the store wearing work boots covered in dirt. Nothing special. Honestly, he looked like a regular contractor. But while I was helping him load supplies into his truck, I noticed something. The truck was brand new. Not just new, expensive. Really expensive. The kind of truck that costs more than I made in a year. And I remember thinking, how does this guy afford that? Before I could stop myself, I asked. Not directly. I just said, "Man, that's a nice truck." The guy laughed. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Best investment I ever made." Investment? It was a truck. That didn't make sense. So I asked him what he meant. And that's when he told me the sentence that changed my life. I don't work for money anymore. My equipment does. At the time, I had no idea what that meant, but for some reason those words followed me home that night, and they stayed in my head for weeks. Because while I was trading hours for dollars, this guy had figured out a way to make money work without him, and I became obsessed with figuring out how. I didn't know it yet, but that random conversation in the Walmart parking lot was about to send me down a path that would eventually turn a broke employee into the owner of a business doing millions in revenue. And it all started with a side hustle I almost didn't try.
For the next few weeks, I couldn't get that guy's words out of my head. I don't work for money anymore. My equipment does. At first, I thought it was some rich guy nonsense, but the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Because every dollar I made came from my time. If I wasn't at Walmart, I wasn't getting paid. Simple as that. And honestly, I was tired of living that way. So I started paying attention. Every customer, every contractor, every small business owner who came through the store. I noticed something interesting. A lot of them weren't necessarily smarter than me. They weren't superheroes. Some of them were actually kind of rough around the edges. But they owned things. Trailers, tools, equipment, small businesses. And somehow those things generated money while they slept. Meanwhile, I was working holidays for extra hours. One night after work, I went down a rabbit hole on YouTube. I started watching videos about side hustles, pressure washing, lawn care, junk removal, vending machines, reselling, anything that could make an extra buck. Most of it looked fake. You know the type. Some guy standing next to a Lamborghini saying, "Bro, I made $50,000 this month with this simple trick." Yeah, okay. But one business kept showing up over and over, junk removal. And unlike the flashy gurus, the people doing it looked normal. Pickup truck, trailer, a couple workers, nothing fancy. The next thing I knew, it was 2 a.m., and I was watching videos of guys hauling old couches and refrigerators. Not exactly exciting content, but the numbers caught my attention. One guy said he charged $400 to remove junk that took less than 2 hours to haul away. I replayed that part 3 times. At Walmart, I was making around $15 an hour. This guy was making hundreds for moving trash. Something clicked. Not a giant light bulb moment, just a tiny shift. For the first time, I saw a path. Maybe not a perfect one, but a path. The problem was I had almost no money, definitely not enough to start a business. Then life did what life always does. It got worse before it got better. A week later, my car broke down. Transmission. The mechanic's estimate might as well have been written in another language because there was no way I could afford it. I remember sitting in that parking lot feeling completely defeated. Like every time I tried to get ahead, something pushed me right back down. Then my buddy Mike called. Mike worked with me at Walmart. Good guy, always hustling. He listened to me complain for about 10 minutes before cutting me off. "Man," he said, "you spend more time talking about starting something than actually starting it." That stung, because he was right. I had spent months researching, watching videos, making plans, but I hadn't actually done anything. Then he said something else. "If you're gonna fail, fail moving forward." That line hit me harder than he probably realized. The next morning, I checked my savings. After bills, I had less than $900 left, not enough to feel safe, but maybe enough to take a shot. So I made a decision that terrified me. I bought a used utility trailer from a guy on Facebook Marketplace. Rusty, beat up, looked like it had survived 3 different wars, but it rolled, and it was mine. The moment I handed over that money, I felt sick, because if this didn't work, I'd be even more broke than before. But as I drove home, pulling that ugly trailer behind me, something else happened. For the first time in years, I felt excited. I had no customers, no business name, no plan beyond figure it out, but I had taken action, and I had no idea that the very first job I landed with that trailer was about to completely change the direction of my life.
A week after I bought that trailer, I still had 0 customers. 0. Not one call, not one text. Not even a scam message asking if I wanted to buy crypto. Nothing. And every day that trailer sat in my apartment parking lot, I felt dumber. My coworkers at Walmart started noticing it. One guy asked, "You starting a landscaping company or something?" Another laughed and said, "Man bought a trailer before he bought customers." Everybody thought they were comedians. Truth is, their jokes got to me, because deep down, I was wondering the same thing. Had I just wasted the last bit of money I had? Then, one Saturday morning, I got my first lead. Not from advertising, not from a website, not from social media. From my mom. Yeah, my first customer was basically a family referral. She called and said one of her friends needed an old shed torn down and hauled away. The lady asked how much I charged. I had absolutely no clue, so I panicked and threw out a number. $250? There was a pause, then she immediately said yes. Immediately. And that's when I knew I messed up. Whenever someone says yes that fast, you probably underpriced yourself. But I was too desperate to care. The following Saturday, I showed up with Mike and my rusty trailer. The shed was way bigger than I expected. Of course it was. Everything looks smaller in pictures. We spent nearly 6 hours tearing it apart. The Florida heat felt like it was personally attacking us. By the end, we were exhausted, covered in dirt, covered in sweat, covered in regret. But when the customer handed me $250 cash, it felt amazing. Not because of the amount, because I had earned it myself, outside of Walmart. For the first time, somebody paid me because I created value, not because I clocked in. That feeling was addictive. A few days later, I posted an ad on Facebook. Nothing fancy, just jump removal, affordable rates, same-day service. One blurry picture of my trailer. That was it. Then something unexpected happened. The phone rang. One job became 2, 2 became 4. Most of them were tiny. Old mattresses, broken furniture, garage cleanouts, nothing glamorous, but every dollar mattered. During the day, I stocked shelves at Walmart. After work, I hauled junk. Weekends, more junk. For months, that became my entire life. Wake up, work, haul, sleep, repeat. I barely saw friends anymore. I was exhausted all the time. But something was changing, slowly. My debt started shrinking. My savings started growing. And for the first time since I could remember, my bank account wasn't constantly trying to give me a heart attack. Then, one evening, everything almost fell apart. I was finishing a job when my truck started making a noise. A bad noise. The kind that instantly empties your stomach. I pulled over. Smoke started coming from under the hood. I just sat there staring at it because I knew exactly what it meant. Without the truck, there was no business. Without the business, I was back to square one. I remember laughing, not because it was funny, because sometimes life punches you so hard the only thing left to do is laugh. The repair estimate came back the next day. Over $4,000. I didn't have it, not even close. And for the first time since starting the side hustle, I seriously thought about quitting. But then something happened that changed everything. One of my customers called me, and the offer he made would turn my little side hustle into a real business, the kind that could finally get me out of Walmart for good.
When that customer called, I figured he wanted another junk pickup, maybe an old couch, a garage clean-out, something like that. Instead, he said, "You got a minute? I think I can help you." This was a guy named Rick. I'd done a job for him about a month earlier. Nice house, successful-looking dude, always moving fast, always on the phone. Apparently, he'd noticed something about me during the job. I showed up on time, did what I said I'd do, didn't complain. In business, that's apparently rarer than it should be. So I told him about the truck situation, the repair bill, the fact that I was thinking about shutting everything down. There was a pause. Then he said, "Don't quit. You're closer than you think." At the time, that sounded like motivational poster nonsense. But then he explained. Rick owned several rental properties. Whenever tenants moved out, they left behind junk, furniture, appliances, boxes, trash, and he was tired of hiring random people who never showed up. So he made me an offer. If I could handle all of his cleanouts, he'd keep sending me work, regular work, every month. Not guaranteed money, but predictable opportunities. For a guy like me, that was huge. The only problem, my truck was still broken. I told him that. Then he surprised me. "How much are you short?" I didn't answer right away. I hated asking for help. Still do. But eventually, I told him. He thought for a second, then said, "I'll front you the difference. You pay me back from the jobs." I honestly thought I heard him wrong. Who does that? This guy barely knew me, but he believed in me before I fully believed in myself. 3 days later, my truck was fixed, and suddenly I wasn't chasing random jobs anymore. I had consistent work. Not enough to quit Walmart, but enough to start building something. For the next 8 months, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. There were weeks where I worked 70 hours, sometimes more. Walmart during the day, junk removal evenings and weekends. My social life disappeared. Dating, forget it. I barely had time to do laundry. But the business kept growing. Then one day, I checked my numbers. Not revenue, profit, actual money left after expenses. And I realized something crazy. The business was making more than my Walmart paycheck. Not eventually, right now, that month. I stared at the spreadsheet for almost 10 minutes because that realization terrified me. Most people think quitting your job feels exciting. For me, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Walmart wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, predictable. Every 2 weeks, money showed up. The business wasn't like that. Some months were great, some weren't. So I kept delaying the decision. Another month, then another, until one afternoon, Walmart made the decision for me. I was stocking shelves when a manager pulled me aside. Nothing dramatic, just a schedule issue, a conflict with the hours I needed for my business. I tried explaining. He didn't care. To him, I was just another employee, replaceable, a number. And standing there listening to him talk, something clicked. I suddenly realized I was working harder on my dreams before 8 a.m. and after 6 p.m. than I was on my actual job. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my resignation letter. I must have rewritten it 10 times. My hands were literally shaking, because once I turned it in, there was no safety net, no backup plan, just me, the business, and a whole lot of uncertainty. The next morning, I walked into Walmart carrying that letter. and I had no idea that within the next year, I'd make more money than I had earned in the previous 5 years combined.
The weird thing about quitting Walmart? I expected fireworks, some big movie moment. Maybe my manager would be shocked. Maybe my coworkers would cheer. Maybe I'd walk out feeling like a king. Yeah, none of that happened. I handed over my resignation letter. My manager looked at it, nodded, said, "All right, good luck." That was it. 8 years of my life reduced to 2 words: good luck. I walked out of that building feeling excited for about 15 minutes. Then reality hit, hard. Because now I had no paycheck, no guaranteed income, no safety net. Every bill depended on me making the business work. And for the first few months, that pressure was brutal. I woke up every day with this knot in my stomach, like if I stopped moving for even a second, everything would fall apart. So I worked, then worked more, then worked even more. I wasn't just doing junk removal anymore. I was the owner, the salesman, the customer service rep, the marketer, the accountant, the laborer, everything. If something broke, it was my problem. If a customer complained, it was my problem. If money was short, it was definitely my problem. But something interesting happened, because now I had time, real time, 40 extra hours every week that used to belong to Walmart, and I poured every single one of them into growing the company. I built a website, learned Google Ads, started collecting customer reviews, bought uniforms, wrapped my truck with company branding. Little things, but they made us look professional, and customers noticed. Calls started increasing, then referrals started coming in, then property managers started calling, then real estate agents, then contractors. The business was growing faster than I could handle by myself. That's when I hired my first employee, a guy named Carlos. Good worker, reliable, way stronger than me, too. The first time I paid him, I almost had a panic attack. Not because of the money, because I realized somebody else's income now depended on my decisions. That responsibility felt heavy. But hiring Carlos changed everything. Because suddenly, I wasn't just buying time, I was multiplying it. 1 truck became 2 crews. 2 crews meant more jobs. More jobs meant more revenue. For the first time, I wasn't just self-employed, I was building a company. Then came the biggest opportunity I'd ever seen. One of the property managers I'd worked with called me about a massive apartment complex, over 300 units. They needed a long-term cleanup contract, the kind of contract that could completely transform a business. The problem? I wasn't ready, not even close. I didn't have enough trucks, didn't have enough employees, didn't have enough equipment. Honestly, I probably shouldn't have even bid on it. But I remembered something Mike told me years earlier. If you're going to fail, fail moving forward. So I submitted the bid anyway. And then I waited. Days felt like weeks. Weeks felt like months. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the call finally came. The property manager sounded excited. I figured that was a good sign. Then she said 6 words that changed my life. We'd like to move forward. I almost dropped the phone because the contract wasn't just big, it was bigger than every job I'd done combined. And landing it would force me to make the biggest financial gamble of my entire life. A gamble that could either turn my company into a multi-million-dollar business or bankrupt me completely.
I didn't celebrate when I got off that call. I just sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall like it was going to explain what I had just gotten myself into. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about big opportunities. They don't feel like success at first. They feel like pressure. And this one felt like a ton of bricks sitting on my chest. 300 apartment units. That meant turnover cleanouts, abandoned furniture, construction debris, emergency calls, deadlines that didn't care if I was tired or short-staffed or overwhelmed. And I was all 3. I had 2 trucks, 3 employees, and way too much confidence for my experience level. But I said yes anyway, because if I backed out now, I wasn't just losing a job, I was losing the chance to level up forever. The first week was chaos, absolute chaos. We were running jobs from sunrise to late night. My phone didn't stop ringing. Carlos was grinding nonstop. Another employee quit after day 3, just walked off the job mid-shift. No warning, no explanation, just gone. And I remember standing in that apartment complex parking lot thinking, I might actually be in over my head. But something else was happening at the same time. Revenue, real revenue, the kind I had never seen before. In 1 week, we made more than I used to make in 3 months at Walmart. It didn't even feel real. Numbers on a screen started turning into real money, and real money started turning into real decisions. We bought another truck, then another crew, then better equipment. But growth came with problems, always. We started missing small details. One customer complained, then another, then a property manager threatened to cancel the contract if we didn't fix our quality control. That one hit hard, because I realized something important. Getting big is easy. Staying good is the hard part. One night, after a 14-hour shift, I sat in my truck alone. No music, no phone, just silence. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for months. Am I actually building a business or just creating a bigger mess? That was the moment everything started to change again, because I stopped focusing on just taking jobs and started focusing on systems. We created checklists, standard procedures, training processes. Instead of just hiring workers, I started building teams. Instead of reacting, we started planning. Slowly, things stabilized. The chaos didn't disappear, but it became controlled chaos, and the company started to feel different, stronger, more structured, like it wasn't just surviving anymore, it was growing on purpose. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the property manager, the same one who gave me the big contract. My stomach dropped a little, because usually calls like that mean problems. But this time, she said something unexpected. Our regional office has been watching your work. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Then she continued, they want to expand your contract statewide. I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second because I didn't even fully understand what she meant. Statewide, not one complex, not one city, multiple locations, massive scale. And suddenly the gamble I took didn't just look big, it looked insane. Because if I said yes, I'd have to expand faster than ever before, hire more people, buy more trucks, risk more money, move faster than I had ever moved in my life. And if I messed it up, everything I built could collapse overnight.
I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, holding the phone, listening to the silence on the other end, like it was waiting for me to either grow into the moment or fold. Statewide. That word kept replaying in my head, because I knew what it really meant. It wasn't just more work. It was a complete transformation of the business, the kind that either turns you into something real or buries you. That night, I went back to my office, if you can even call it that back then, more like a small room with a whiteboard, 2 desks, and way too many energy drinks. Carlos was there, going through invoices, tired as hell, but still grinding. I told him about the call. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "So, what's the move, boss?" Boss. That still felt weird at the time. I looked at the whiteboard, looked at the numbers, looked at everything we had built from nothing, and I realized something simple. We weren't Walmart employees anymore trying to make extra money. We weren't a side hustle anymore either. We were already a company. We just hadn't acted like one yet. So I made the decision. We said yes. And everything after that happened fast. Too fast. We hired aggressively, trained faster than we should have, bought equipment before we were fully ready, expanded into new cities with crews I barely had time to meet. It was messy, I'm not going to lie about that. There were mistakes, bad hires, late nights fixing problems that shouldn't have existed. But there was also momentum, real momentum, the kind you can't fake. Within a year,
We went from a couple trucks in one city to multiple teams across the state. Revenue started climbing in ways I used to only see in YouTube videos. First, $1 million months, then consistent $2 million quarters, then contracts I never even would have thought possible when I was still clocking into Walmart, wondering if I could afford gas. And somewhere in all that chaos, I finally understood what that contractor meant years ago. My equipment works for me. That's what I built. Not overnight, not clean, not perfect, but real. Today, when people ask me how I went from Walmart to a $10 million business, I don't give them some motivational speech. Because honestly, there was no magic moment. Just a lot of uncomfortable ones. A rusty trailer, a broken truck, a scared decision to quit a stable job, and a whole lot of days where I had no idea what I was doing. But I kept moving anyway. And I think that's the part most people miss. It's not about having a perfect plan. It's about not stopping when the plan stops making sense. Now I sit in meetings with people who manage numbers I used to dream about. And every once in a while, I still think about that Walmart break room, about the guy with the expensive truck, about how one random conversation started everything. And if I'm being real, if I could go back and tell that version of me one thing, I wouldn't say get rich. I wouldn't say start a business. I'd just say, don't ignore that weird idea that won't leave your head. Because for me, that was the beginning of everything.
Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.